And Fury's skills and his jab and his moves are just too good. He doesn't get caught. He got caught by the one punch against Steve Cunningham earlier in his career where he lost his focus and concentration and got caught with a punch and got knocked down by a cruiserweight. And then he got up, but he wasn't really hurt. He has a really good ability to take the punch. Yeah, I just can't see any of those smaller guys, even like Mike Tyson at his best. I don't see how they can deal with Tyson. I think Tyson Fury at his best could beat anybody from boxing history. Some families actually sell their homes and put all the emphasis on the kid making it in tennis to support the family.
Yeah.
I'm not going to name any other names, but there's some, and it's still going on now that I know of. Tremendous pressure on the kid to make it in tennis. Yeah, he had lost to Alcaraz at the Wimbledon final, and he could not afford to lose to him a second time. The balance of power was very important. The mental edge there. But Djokovic saved a match point and ended up winning. It was unbelievable match, high level, all three sets. And then a lot of people don't think that Alcaraz has recovered from that loss.
Hey there, I'm Sifu Slim. I'm coming to you from Santa Barbara, California, where the fall weather is out, doing the run sometime with a little down vest on, still going in the ocean, getting that plunge, getting the endorphins released, getting the psychology and the physiology enhanced by doing that cold plunge into 60 or 61 degree Pacific Ocean water. And I'm pleased today to have connected with someone I've heard about for many moons. And he's in Teaneck, New Jersey, and I'm from New Jersey originally. I still consider myself a New Jerseyan who lives around the globe a bit. But Scoop Malinowski is coming to us, and he's a sports journalist. He's interested specifically in two sports that he follows the most, as I do, boxing historically. And I wouldn't say I'm a boxing historian of the last 5 years. I do enjoy watching that. But I followed boxing from especially the 50s through the 90s quite closely and still watch a lot of that content and listen to old interviews. And also tennis. Even though golf has been my main sport, it's hard to follow golf when the top player is not in the top 5 of the next tournament and the next tournament after that. Whereas in tennis, the top 5 guys in the tournament will almost always be in the quarters, semis, or finals. So it's easy to follow those people on a regular basis. And now we can look back at a career like McEnroe, 20 years, and you can look back at Djokovic longer and all these other players. And it's easier to follow individuals in tennis than I believe than it is in golf, just because of the way the coverage is and who's in the spotlight. So over to Scoop to tell us a little bit about himself and to see if he has any comments to share about the history of boxing and tennis and how he got interested in those two endeavors.
First got interested in boxing by seeing the movie Rocky, 1976 in the movie theater. Sifu went to the movies one day with my best friend at the time, Matthew Shapiro. We both had no idea about the movie, went to see it, and we're both totally blown away. And it was the beginning of the boxing. Tennis was different start in a hotel in Boston. My father, Eugene, was on a business trip, took us in the hotel lobby. Parents saw Chris Evert they didn't know tennis at all. They knew who she was. They never played tennis. Said, you should go get her autograph. And went over to get the autograph, me and my brother, and she couldn't have been she was unbelievably nice, to the point where maybe it was the first crush of my life at like age 7 or 8, just fell in love with her, how nice she was. And that started the tennis interest. Years later, started watching it on TV.
Scoop, can you share what your career path has been and how many hours a day that you spend researching things for that career?
I don't know how many. I don't keep track of the hours, but I do a lot of. Last night I just went to a boxing match at Madison Square Garden. Callum Walsh, decision against Ismail Villarreal. Covered that for my website, ringobserver.com. I did a biofile interview with Jerry Cooney. I did a quick little interview with the current superstar, Teofimo Lopez. I really don't kind of just go with the flow, and I don't really, it's not every day. I work every day on whatever, different things.
So nowadays you're digging through websites, links, emails, that type of thing. 20 years ago, were you more of digging through print files and things like that?
I think most of my work now is I do interviews with people and collect them and put them together. More so than actually digging research. That's sometimes to verify, but that's the way most of my books are. I just finished facing Monica Seles and facing Novak Djokovic, and I did most of the interviews, and I compile and put them all together. And
so you haven't been a media sports journalist as much as a private independent author of books and interview person for your website.
Earlier years, I did mostly biofiles. Biofile interview is an interview I do with people where I ask the list of questions for a tennis player: first memory of tennis inspirations, favorite movies, greatest moment of career, most painful moment of career, funny memory, why do you love tennis, favorite ice cream flavor. I did that I'm syndicated in different outlets: New York Daily News, New York Post, MLB.com, so many different ones.
So would you call it an author / sports journalist, or what would you call what you do?
Yeah, whatever you want. Reporter, author, creative content.
Now, you mentioned Chris Evert, correct, a few minutes ago?
Yep.
So you and I had talked some time ago about the idea of the GOAT, the GOAT, the greatest of all time. And I would put Chris Evert in that list. And you can look it up statistically. You can look what she did to the game. You could look at how she advanced her game when Martina brought a new ethos into female tennis, new athletic skill set. Martina was watching video of her opponents. She had sports therapy that was very advanced. So she was the consummate modern athlete for her era. I think she revolutionized a lot of that. Chris Evert, maybe not as much leading that field, but saw what was happening and dove in and played a lot with her brothers. I imagine she had a lot of male practice partners, like the Williams sisters have done. You're hitting with men who hit at faster pace, so you should be able to handle the faster paced women. And the women who don't hit as fast as men, you should be able to handle them even better. So Chris Evert did a lot of those things. And I'd put her on my all-time great list. How about you?
Martina Navratilova proved that she was above her. Then came Steffi Graf. Monica Seles. She's definitely, at her time, she was one of the greatest of all time. But I think since then, several players have passed her.
Yeah.
Seles, Graf, Navratilova, Williams, one-dimensional baseliner. I don't. Even though she had some good matches with young Seles and she beat her, and she said one of her greatest wins was beating Seles.
I think after losing 3 in a row, she won one, something like that.
At US Open, I think that one was.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I haven't watched the Evert match in so many years. So yeah, she's definitely one of the all-time greats.
Yeah, I put her on the list. Navratilova, we both mentioned, has an interesting distinction that I didn't know about until maybe the last 2 years, that she was somewhat chosen and also volunteered her services to bring women's tennis into the big time. And how she did that was playing in tournaments all over the world and saying yes to the point where she might have been playing 42 weeks a year, some huge number of weeks per year, sometimes even in exhibitions, flying to Tokyo, flying to South America for a 2-day or a 4-day gig. So lots of time in airports and hotels, and doing that not for money and fame for herself and notoriety. From what she shared in the interview, it's an interview with Chris Evert on Chris's YouTube channel with Martina, and that was probably shot in the last 3 years. And Martina, for Virginia Slims and for the women's tour, was the person, top ranked player, and she would show up at these other events, and then she, of course, could call the other top females and ask them if they would participate also. And they went out and barnstormed the place, just like an author back in the 1940s or 50s might have just said, "Hey, I'm going to go on a year or a 3-year book tour to get my book out there and make it that way, and just live out of a hotel on their station wagon." So she is the person who sacrificed a lot of her own time and energy and wear and tear on her body to go out and help bring women's tennis up in stature so that it would be more comparable to the men's tour. I don't know if you had heard about that, but I didn't know until I watched this interview recently.
No, that's interesting. They never talk about that in the tennis media. But you're making me think of a story about Navratilova. Several years ago, I found myself in a dinner with Mike Tyson after the Leroy Neiman Memorial, and we started talking about tennis. And I didn't know that Tyson loved tennis back then. This is like 10 years ago, and I was trying to say that I thought Serena Williams was the greatest because she would beat anybody one-on-one. Big serve, too strong. I think she would blow out all those players like Evert and Navratilova. And he disagreed with me. He was telling me that he thought Martina Navratilova was the greatest of all time because of her longevity, how many Grand Slams she won, and for how many years she did it. And he beat me in the argument. I couldn't really argue that. And so he believed that Martina Navratilova was the greatest of all time because
he's a student of boxing, and now I know he's a student of tennis.
He really is. And I found out later, because we have a mutual friend, that he watches tennis more than boxing now, and he knows all the tennis players. He knows all the details about them. He's very interested in tennis, and his daughter is, I think, 14 or 15, and she's playing competitive tennis. She actually played the major junior championship, Eddie Hurt championships at IMG Academy last November, and she won 2 rounds in the qualifying draw. So she's a very good player. So Tyson's very involved in tennis.
Now I know why he got involved in it. I would guess that until his daughter showed some interest in that sport, that he perhaps wasn't as interested in tennis. That's what my guess would be, but I don't know. I mean, he studied boxing.
No. He was actually. He mentioned that day that Martina Navratilova stayed at his house in Bedminster, New Jersey,
back in the 90s,
80s actually.
80s.
She was still playing and training, and she would stay at the house. His wife at the time, Robin Givens, was good friends with tennis player Laurie McNeil, so they were all connected.
I
And
got it.
Navratilova also trained a lot with the Rutgers University tennis team, which is about a half hour away from where Tyson lived. So Tyson was exposed to tennis back then in the
Got
80s.
it. Got it. I didn't know that. So I guess Robin Givens was the initiator of that.
Yeah, Robin Givens' sister, Robin was I believe she was a junior player. Her sister was a junior player. Yep, and Robin Givens actually is my neighbor in Florida. She lives right around the corner from me in Bradenton, Florida. And I'm sure you heard that she had a kid with Murphy Jensen,
No.
and he was a very good junior player and played in college tennis.
Yeah, the Luke Jensen, I think, is the person who can serve lefty and righty. Does that sound correct?
Say it again,
I think his
Steve.
brother Luke Jensen is the person who can serve lefty or righty,
Yes.
and he's the one who was brought in to hit the can opener serve and the other serves that McEnroe can hit before Agassi and McEnroe played. I can't remember if it was the U.S. Open, Wimbledon, or where it was, but he talked about it back in the day. He's the one who wore the Oakley razor blades, strong athlete. I would say larger than most of the top five players of the last 30 years. He's kind of a Roscoe Tanner build, maybe even a little stronger. And they brought him in to hit with Agassi to hit those serves so he could be ready for McEnroe because it's a huge part of McEnroe's game, especially that can opener serve. We can on the ad court, he can draw you off the court with that and come in and polish off the volley. And so he said that in 20 minutes, Agassi had that down. So they didn't have, from what he said, they didn't have to practice it for weeks. Agassi, he blasted those serves at Agassi and Agassi got it. And then he came in and McEnroe played very well in that match, but Agassi had, I would guess, the lowest unforced errors in a semifinal, quarterfinal, final. I can't remember what it was, but dominated McEnroe with so many passing shots and so few unforced errors that I said I think Agassi that day could have played anyone in any era with any racket and any technology and would have done very well against him because he was just so on.
I interviewed Luke Jensen several times, Sifu, and he said he was really good friends with Agassi back in those days. Said Agassi was known for taking him and some celebrity on some trip, and Agassi would just pay for everything. I vividly remember Luke Jensen telling that story, and also McEnroe's serve was lethal. Even when he was retired, he was playing the senior tour. Elon Bloom was practicing with McEnroe to get ready to be an alternate substitute into a senior tournament in Brazil to play Marcelo Rios. And Gilad Bloom was practicing with McEnroe twice a week to get ready for that. And Rios was the dominant force on the senior tour because he was the youngest guy. And he said when he played Rios, after practicing with McEnroe to get ready for Rios, he said that McEnroe's serve was so much tougher than Rios' serve. And he had no problem with Rios' serve. And he ended up beating Rios like 6-love, 6-1. It was like a huge surprise.
This is 20 or 30 years difference in age, and McEnroe's serve is better than a guy 20 or 30 years younger than his.
That's what Gilad Bloom said. Yep.
Wow, wow.
Rios might have been overconfident though, and just cruised in there expecting it to be the easy win against no-name Gilad Bloom, who just a substitute into the tournament. So maybe that was a part of it too.
I did read somewhere that McEnroe has in his shoulder. So you would think that an athlete, you want to have big, strong shoulders, maybe even wide shoulders. McEnroe doesn't. I'm kind of similar build to McEnroe in that aspect, in the shoulder aspect. He has bigger like thighs and more compact than I am, more gangly, more like Djokovic. But his shoulder rotation, and you can watch his sideways serve, and you can watch his shoulders, had an extra, I think it was something like 20 to 25% ability to turn. So it would be like flexibility and functionality. It's just his joint and the supportive structure around that joint. And that includes your whole spine. It's really a whole body thing that gives you that. It's just not one joint, but it had extra 20 to 25% distance that it could open up as compared to the normal human. And that is one of the reasons, besides all the other great things he does with his serve and his timing and his confidence, that he has that ability at 160 some pounds to crack it pretty impressively, even against guys who were, the 6'5" boomers. He could still, move them around with that serve of his.
Pete Sampras too. I remember seeing that he was so flexible in his shoulders, especially that he could reach back his arms and touch his two elbows together behind his back.
Mm. So how are you doing that? I got you. I can't do it. So he could just reach back and put the elbows together. That's incredible.
Well, I don't know if he can still do that now, but back then when he was a player, he could. Yeah. And then I saw, after becoming aware of that fact, I remember seeing Lennox Lewis, who was the heavyweight champion of the world at the time, training in the Poconos for several of his fights. And he, after his workouts, I remember his coach would have him doing all these shoulder stretching things. And he showed amazing shoulder flexibility.
Sheesh. Navratilova played with more frequency until later in age than most female players, maybe all. Started in 75, retired in 2006. So that's 21 years of being on and saying yes and training hard, studying video, sports psychology, all the stuff she did, and overcoming obstacles because of her sexual persuasion, being an athletic looking female, different than Chris Evert, who looks like a female athlete, but she doesn't look like a buff female athlete, which Martina, of course, did. I mean, veins in her bicep, forearm, that's pretty impressive, just full stature of quality and functional muscles. So that was Martina. Any thoughts about her longevity and her what she brought to the game and left as a legacy?
You must have really, really loved playing and competing to play that long with so much enthusiasm. Even at the end, playing doubles, didn't she win like a U.S. Open with Mike, one of the Bryan brothers? Just still had that great spirit and enthusiasm at such a late age. She probably would have kept on going if she could have. Yep.
Scoop, I haven't studied Margaret Court. Maybe I've watched a documentary or two ages ago, but I looked up Margaret Court's record, 192 titles. Can you imagine that?
They don't talk about her much in that all-time greatest, but 64 total Grand Slams and the 24 in singles. Don't think that's ever going to be
eclipsed.
Threatened.
Yeah. Rod Laver.
Funny. I did a profile with Margaret Court a few years ago. She said her prize, how different tennis was back then. Her prize for winning one of the Australian Open was an umbrella.
What year would that have been, you think?
That was in the 60s.
Oh gosh, an umbrella for winning the Australian Open. And was she at a time where you had to be an amateur to be in that event?
I think it was pre that era.
Pre-open era. Okay.
Pre-open era, yeah.
Rod Laver. So when McEnroe was asked about the GOATs, he mentions Rod Laver, one of the Ponchos. I think it was Poncho Gonzalez, but I can't remember. He mentions a couple people, but he puts Rod Laver in that group. And I think when I watch Rod Laver and I hear about him, I look at a person who's very determined, almost like a contractor going to the work site and seeing the job and say, we're going to get this done, whether it's done by 4 o'clock this afternoon or 10 o'clock at night, we're going to get this done. And I've worked on construction sites with people like that, and I know who these guys are and gals too. And I think Rod Laver had that. He looked at the task like people from eras that predate you and I, like our parents and grandparents' generation, and they looked at things in a different way than many people do now. The Kennedy adage, ask not what your country can do for you, but you can do for your country. These were, a lot of these people were people that were willing to sacrifice whatever to get something done, to produce, to provide for their families, to make their career work, to help out a friend, a brother, or whatever. I think Rod Laver, besides being a great athlete, he had that determination that we see in a lot of those old school workers from his era. Let me know what you think, Scoop.
I never saw him play a lot in his. I kind of missed the whole Rod Laver. I got into tennis years later after him, so I really don't understand and appreciate how great he was. But knowing he won two of those Grand Slams, which nobody else has done, 1960 and 1969, I believe, and he was the dominant force, the big name in tennis. Even as an Australian, he was hugely popular and successful in America. But I also know the funny story that he almost lost his set to a 12-year-old Jimmy Arias. But he was still ranked in the top 50 in the world in his late 30s. He went to play an exhibition in Buffalo, and he needed to practice with somebody to get ready for it. And he said, I'd like to play the best player in Buffalo. And just so happened that year, the best player in Buffalo who won the Buffalo Open tennis tournament was a 12-year-old kid named Jimmy Arias. That's how good he was. And so Jimmy showed up to play Rod Laver for the practice match kind of exhibition thing. Well, no, it wasn't it was practice match, but it became hyped up by the media a little bit because everybody was aware of how good Jimmy Arias was back then. And then Laver struggled in that match. Arias told me that Laver was kind of just like hitting serves in, and Arias was ripping winners. He won the first 4 points. He was up 2-love. And then Laver told him, "You're not going to win another game, kid." But Arias did win, and Arias ended up losing his set 7-5. So that's one of the most insider stories that I know about Rod Laver.
Arias.
I wish I knew more. I wish I was alive when into tennis when he was dominant. It would have been awesome to see him at his best.
Age 59, currently, born August 16th of 64 in Buffalo, as you mentioned. Turned pro in 1980, so he's 16-ish. Retired in 94 after 14 years. Right-handed, one-handed backhand, Nick Bollettieri in Bradenton. And I've met Arias before. I don't know much about him. I would guess smiley, pleasant person. Is that what you took away from your connection with him?
He was unbelievable. Some people say that Arias said himself that he thought that was the best he ever played when he was 12 years old. Then he went to Bollettieri's later that year when he was 12, and he became, I think, 7 in the world or 5 in the world ATP, and he won French Open mixed doubles Grand Slam with Andrea Jaeger when he was, I believe, 17. But
Yep.
his career kind of never fulfilled. He won titles. He was top 10 in the world. He had some big matches. Then he got mononucleosis and apparently never really fully recovered from that. Injuries, and kind of maybe didn't quite fulfill the potential that many, especially people in Buffalo, expected. And then there's the side of the story from a Buffalo tennis insider who said that they kind of wondered if Bollettieri at the time was really qualified to handle such a young 12-year-old extraordinary phenom like Arias. Because at the time, in the early 80s, Bollettieri really didn't have any kind of experience in the professional tennis world. So, but
ex-military guy.
Yep. And very good coach, but not quite knowledgeable at the professional elite level.
So interesting that you brought that up. So I've written 3 books on fitness, health, and the psychology and the physiology and the history of these types of things. And the third book that I haven't released yet, but I hope to soon, finished it a few years ago, but I want to wait till I have like the right momentum and marketing behind it. I just don't want to put it on Amazon and say, here it is, world, and be lost. Is called Raising a Child Athlete, things you need to know. And the title may be changed to Are You Raising a Child Athlete, or just Raising a Child Athlete with a question mark. And in there, I talk about the difference between developing an athlete kind of organically and with sustainability and wellness in mind, of mind, body, and spirit, versus the overkill, high performance, win at all costs, sacrifice everything, break down your mind, body, and spirit ethos, which permeates things. And I trace it all the way back to ancient Sparta, where the motto was, when your mother sent you away to war, you could have been 16 or 30, whatever your age was, she said, you come back with your shield or on your shield. So that means you're either dead or you killed the other guys and you come back with your shield still intact. You don't drop your shield and run. So that's the ethos from ancient Sparta, still seen in, the Marine training of today and other military training. And it's still seen in a lot of high school, college, and pro sports. You sacrifice it, you play injured, you do all these things, you sacrifice your body. And that's something I'd like to hear your point of view on, Coop.
Hi, this is Sifu Slim, author of The Aging Athlete. In this book, you're going to get to hear about two different groups of former high-performance athletes. One group, which is made up of 90% of the former athletes, does not do physical activity on a regular basis and tends to suffer the consequences of a sedentary lifestyle. The other group, which is made up of 10% of the former athletes, is doing physical activity on a regular basis and tends to thrive through the aging process, or at least has a better chance at coping with the aging process. We could have taken these folks to a lab and done all kinds of tests on them. Instead, we slowed them down and sat them down and asked them, in their own words, to describe why they're wired the way they are, so that we all, former athletes and non-athletes, can use some of their inspirational and motivational and mindset lessons in our own lives. I hope you pick up a copy today. You can go to theagingathlete.com. And when you have a chance to read it, I'd love to hear back from you to find out what your thoughts are on the stories of these aging athletes.
Making me think, Sifu, of Mike Tyson. The classic Mike Tyson story of unknown talent spotted by the guy in the detention home, and hey, this guy's good. This kid's good. Then you take him to Customato, who managed world champions, and Customato saw him for a few minutes and said, "This kid's the future heavyweight champion of the world." And the kid, Mike Tyson, had no idea how good he was, or he thought the old man was crazy. But Customato's total full belief from the beginning that Mike Tyson would be heavyweight champion of the world inspired Mike Tyson. That was to have that kind of belief behind him. I think that's the classic story of a young athlete making it.
What about the part that I mentioned about the overkill that has permeated the world of junior sports over perhaps the last 30 years, where you could have a 10-year-old that's got a personal trainer. So the mom's taking him to school, taking him to the tennis coaching system after school, getting elite training, and then going to personal training after that, and maybe physiotherapy after that, and then having him go home and do his homework, maybe with a tutor. It's kind of like building an elite athlete on a 10-year-old level. So you turn Michael Jackson into a guy who never developed organically and had problems later. He's kind of a performance athlete, definitely a dance athlete. And you can trace that back to the tennis player the Japanese American tennis player who was left Roland Garros 4 years ago.
Naomi Osaka.
Yeah, Naomi Osaka, who said, "Hey, I grew up on texting. I'm not used to talking about myself. I'm not used to even talking to people on this type of level. I can't handle it. I'm going through stress." And so these are some of the fallouts that we see when you take young people and they don't develop with a lot of their own instincts. They just kind of fall into the system, and the system, and their parents may even say that high performance, win at all costs, do well in school, eat the right thing, don't go out and have fun with your friends. It's like this elite performance, like building an astronaut, starting at age 10. You want to be ready by the time the astronaut's 28 or whatever the age is. I would call it excessiveness at a young age. And McEnroe talked about this in a video I saw, an interview with him recently. He said, if you had sent me at age 12 to the Voluntary Academy and I did 10 hours of tennis related things per day, I would have left the game right away. He would have known at age 10 or 12 that wasn't the thing to do with his life. So over to you, Scoop.
A bunch of responses to that. But then Voluntary told me that McEnroe actually sent one of his sons to his academy to train tennis. So, in your prior part, you forgot to mention some families actually sell their homes and put all the emphasis on the kid making it in tennis to support the family.
Yeah. The Williams sisters.
I'm not going to name any other names, but there's some, and it's still going on now that I know of. Tremendous pressure on the kid to make it in tennis. It can be a tough sport. I think it's the hardest sport in the world to make it in. There's so much competition.
There's a lot of money in it.
There's so many players competing. The pool of talent. Boxing, you can start at age. There's been boxers that started boxing after age 20 and became world champion. That could never happen in tennis.
Never. No. So the point I wanted to make about that, Scoop, is that I'm not saying that if someone has a goal like Djokovic as a young person, people saw his talent, he was interested in it, he was in a war-torn country. He says, I'm going to make this my career, and he does whatever he can. But he's got the Wim Hof method. He doesn't do vaccinations. He's doing very healthful diet. He got weed out of his diet because it negatively impacted him, which the way we grow wheat in many cases negatively impacts a lot of us. And he made his decision, and he's done well with that decision. If he doesn't commit harikari in his 30s or 50s, and he lives a long, healthful life, and hasn't lost his mind, I think he's lived a very good high performance life, moving into a more balanced life. So that would be a winning story. No breakdowns that I know of. No him on the ledge, ready to jump off, although maybe he has thought about that. But I haven't read things like that about Djokovic, where his excessive lifestyle and focus has negatively impacted his health, mind, body, and spirit, or his family's. Do you know anything different than I do about that?
No. Yeah, Djokovic and Nadal are pretty similar, that they both kind of skyrocketed to the top. Djokovic, I think he said that he wanted to be number one in the world when he was age 7. And he had that first great coach, that Serbian woman, Jelena Gencic, who also coached Monica Seles. And she must have been an incredible coach to spot the talent in Novak Djokovic and to develop it at first stage. And Djokovic and Nadal kind of, they kind of developed and quickly, and they didn't have that period like Roger Federer had, that a lot of people aren't aware of or don't remember, that Federer, after juniors, he struggled to adapt to the professional level, and remember Steve Tigner of Tennis Magazine told me, because I did a book facing Federer, and I asked Steve Tigner for his anecdote of Federer, and he said he was interviewing him at the Miami Open when he was still ranked around 100 in the world and struggling to make it in the ATP, and he just lost early there in Miami to Kenneth Carlson. They were doing the feature on him and then photo shoot on the beach. And he said, Federer said the quote to him, I really don't know if I'm going to have a career in tennis. He really wasn't sure if he was going to make it. And of course he did, but I don't think Nadal and Djokovic ever went through that kind of adversity and self-doubt struggle early in their career.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. And part of the stereotypical personality and behavior of Swiss Germans like Federer is to be brutally honest. It's not, we would consider it almost an affront sometimes, the way some of the dialogues happen between Swiss Germans, and maybe if we're at a dinner with Swiss Germans, or even German people, and to some extent Austrian people, where I spent a lot of time living in Austria. Federer was like that, just, say it like, tell it like it is. So I can see him saying that about not knowing if he's going to make it. I can see other, people from different countries saying that also, but I can definitely see a Swiss German saying that and not doing the fake it until you make it type of behavior that we hear about in, trying to climb the corporate ladder or the dating scene or whatever you're trying to do. The fake it till you make it. When's the first time you heard the phrase, Scoop, fake it till you make it?
Maybe today. I don't think I've ever heard that one before, actually, Sifu.
So I heard that on a YouTube podcast host who talks about his life in the corporate world starting in the late 80s and how he, as a African American individual, rose to pretty high ranks. He said, I had to work 3 times as hard, maybe 100 times as hard in his mind, and do everything right and fake it until you make it. And so, to give you an example, Ben Franklin, ostracized by his older brother out of Boston because Ben had a talent for writing, and the older brother didn't want to let Ben in because I think he knew that Ben had more talent and he was a congenial, intelligent, highly intelligent person, and the older brother didn't want the competition. So that goes back for the history of humanity. So somebody who's good at something doesn't want somebody who's better to come along. So Ben wound up in Philadelphia, and I think he was in his 20s, wasn't very portly yet, and he opened up his printing shop, and he had his I think daily newspaper that he was printing. And so in order to get the townspeople thinking that he was successful and creative and making things happen, he would take a wheelbarrow and it would be empty, and then he would go down to a different location down the street in Philadelphia. This is like cobblestone streets or dirt streets back in the 1700s. And he would fill that up. I'm not sure if he put a little covering over, like a canvas or something. And then he'd go back to his print shop. Like, he actually had things to do when he really didn't have that much to do. So he did every little thing that he could to fake it until he could make it. And if you sell one paper one day and 2 the next, and then you go into the doubling factor, so 2 becomes 4, 4 to 8. Now you're doubling things at an extraordinary rate. That's how he was able to make that business, his printing business and his writing business, a success. And then he followed that with being an inventor and all kinds of other things. Over to you, Scoop.
Well, just remember, I was wrong. Fake it till you make it is another way of saying if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with BS. So I think it's the same thing. I did hear of it, but not familiar much with Ben Franklin's story at all. Did they ever make a movie about him?
They have many documentaries and that have professional actors. That the one gentleman who plays the older Franklin, the portly Franklin, is so good. I remembered, I probably saw it 12 years ago, I said, how do you get a better documentary and a better, professional actor than what they put together here in this? I think it's a two-part documentary series. I'm not sure if it's BBC or the United States who produced this, but it's so well done. And I, as a man who loves intellectuals and loves history, you fall in love with the story of Ben Franklin. At least I did from watching this documentary, which is one of countless documentaries on Ben Franklin.
Want to see that too. The last thing I heard about Ben Franklin, kind of in the news, they don't really talk about it much in modern times, but have you heard that story about supposedly finding human bones in his basement ground floor, in the
I have
ground
not.
under? That's what comes to mind at the mention of Ben Franklin recently, as opposed to, of course, the Philadelphia politician and electricity, flying a kite.
Navigating the ocean currents, he went back to England and came back again many times. And he was, America's representative over in England, where he was beloved. And one of the things he did is he took a bag. I'm not sure if it was empty or what he put in the bag, and he would put it down in the water with a line. And he would do this when they were moving and when they were stagnant. And he would watch what the current did with it. So he was one of the first people who chronicled the difference in currents in different places in the Atlantic Ocean and maybe in other places that he landed. I'm not sure if he went anywhere besides the Atlantic and the English Channel, or in the North Atlantic maybe a little bit. But he did that. So he's just very curious by nature, always trying to figure things out. And that's what was, part of the Enlightenment, the open freedom of thought and of sharing ideas and freedom of expression. This is one of the great things about the Enlightenment. And it seems with some of this cancel culture that we're seeing right now, and some of the corporate control and the control of universities and big research institutions, that it goes contrary to the goals of the Enlightenment, which is allow people to go out and dig into things. And even if they don't have a doctorate degree, which people didn't have in the 1700s, allow them to dig into things, publish, and let other people test their findings, and then let them confer, and not do it with ego, do it in a scientific way where you want to be proved wrong. If you come out with a new hypothesis, you tested it, it becomes a conclusion. You want to know if that conclusion is accurate. So you want other people or yourself to disprove it if it's not. And that's how good science is meant to work. Over to you, Skip. Scoop.
That was not one of my top subjects in school. We got to change the subject.
Arthur Ashe. So we mentioned his name in our previous conversation. I went to college in Richmond, Virginia, with a buddy, Norm, who's one of our both persons buddy. And Arthur Ashe from Richmond, Virginia, grew up in a time of racism. He was an intellectual, liked to read, liked school. He was, of course, taught that, tennis in his era, 50s growing up, 60s, is for affluent people. You wear white. It's a white-centric sport. The coaches are white. The country clubs are made up of white people. So here's Arthur Ashe that comes along, and he had to leave Richmond, Virginia. I'm not sure if it was Chicago, but he went to somewhere where there was more ethnic balance in terms of being coached and being able to train at different facilities. I'm not sure how long he did that, but that's one of the ways he was able to go from his development as his career as an adolescent and a younger man to find freedom in a time of high racism.
Just read a great quote about Arthur Ashe, which I had never heard before, and it was from Ancho Gonzalez, and he said if Arthur Ashe would have reduced the amount of different strokes he hit, he could be the best player in the world today. he said he hit two. Seemed like he was saying Arthur. I didn't see Arthur Ashe play, just on the highlights, so I'm not really familiar with his game. That Arthur Ashe hit too many different shots. He had too many different options instead of just playing the same shots. He thought if he played more of the same shots, there's 3 different shots, he would have been the best player in the world. Pancho Gonzalez said that, and you have to respect what Pancho Gonzalez said because he was the best player in the world at one time. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I'm going to think about that. My first reaction to it is tennis is different than basketball. So Michael Jordan, of course, Kobe Bryant, many of these great players had such a variety of what they could do. And Michael Jordan was an inside player for his first few years in the NBA. And then his brother told him, I think his brother was a little bit older, that you're going to wear yourself down by going into the hoop. These big guys are going to clobber you. You're going to land on their feet, break your ankle. You got to learn the outside shot. So he developed that. He great defensive player. So he was he had everything, I would guess. Kobe Bryant had everything. And in tennis, McEnroe, not a baseliner, so he didn't have everything. He could win at the baseline, but he couldn't win against a guy like Lendl if he stayed at the baseline, or Wilander. So that's an interesting thing. Tennis.
But he did. But McEnroe did beat Lendl 7 times in a row one time.
He did, but he did his full court game. He didn't stay at the baseline.
Well, he said Don Budge called him and actually told him stop attacking him in the corners and giving him the angles, go down the middle.
Yep. I remember McEnroe talking about that because he had gone through his prime, dominating so many players, and then Lendl, who kept advancing his game to an extreme level and with extreme rapidity, won 7 in a row, and McEnroe didn't know what to do. And then, as you mentioned, he got that. Was it a phone call? You said?
Yeah, Don Budge supposedly called him. Yep,
called him, and that's what he said. And then he had more success against Lendl, but he couldn't stay at the baseline. So that's what I'm saying. In tennis, you could have less strokes and do very well. Like the 3 greats of the last 2 of the 3 greats of the last 25 years are predominantly at the baseline. Nadal mostly at the baseline, Djokovic mostly at the baseline, Federer more of an all-court game, Sampras more at the net than any of those 3 players, and Agassi at the baseline. So Agassi was more like the 3 greats who followed him. Sampras was more like a hybrid of McEnroe with better serve, better athleticism, and his volleys. I don't think you can say that McEnroe's volleys are better than Sampras's, because Sampras could hit those volleys from approaching with this new modern fast-paced game where they're hitting to him when he's at the service line. So McEnroe had a lot more volleys inside the service line because of the different speed of the game during his era with the smaller rackets, whereas Sampras had to face guys who were booming those returns with modern physiques and modern racket technology and training, and he's hitting those great volleys, oftentimes just a little bit inside the service line. So that's kind of a big change in the game from McEnroe to Sampras. Over to you, Scoop.
You see that match when Djokovic? What was that match? Djokovic played, I think it was against Alcaraz in the Cincinnati final, where he made like 20 volleys winners. It was like the most volley winners he ever made in his whole career. Did you see that Cincinnati match?
I have to watch that. That's like a year ago.
It was just before U.S. Open. It's one of the greatest matches ever. One of the greatest matches ever played. Highest level of tennis ever played. It was an unbelievable match. Set points. You have to watch. It's a match everybody has to. Every tennis group. You have to watch that match to see what happened there.
I'm going to watch that. I like to hear those stories where someone changes their game a little bit to win and is successful at it.
Yeah, he had lost to Alcaraz at the Wimbledon final, and he could not afford to lose to him a second time. The balance of power, was very important. The mental edge there. But Djokovic saved a match point and ended up winning. It was unbelievable match, high level, all three sets. And then a lot of people don't think that Alcaraz has recovered from that loss. Hasn't been the same since then. He hasn't won a title since then.
Wow.
And everybody was, after Wimbledon, most of the media were talking about even Navratilova saying this guy is going to be the greatest of all time. And created unreal expectations on Alcaraz after he beat Djokovic at Wimbledon in the 5 sets. And it became an impossible image for him to live up to. And every tournament he goes to now, he's expected to win because all these people like Navratilova are calling him the future greatest of all time, and that's got to be hard for him to play.
It's a jinx. It's not helpful for most people to hear that. When I saw how well Alcaraz played the last 2 years, I saw his athleticism. I saw that he could serve and volley naturally. It looked to me like a Sampras, like a McEnroe, and he looked so good. And I don't want to jinx him, but I'm just going to share with you what my intuition and my unconscious mind and conscious mind came up with. I said, he's so good and he's so on top of his game and he's such a great athlete and he's friendly and he's bubbly and he's this young guy who's it's like exploding of success, good vibes and kindness. I said, I don't think this is going to last. I don't think this is going to become a Djokovic or a Federer or a Nadal. I don't see his burst and his blooming into this incredible athlete as something that's going to last 20 or 22 years or something like that. I think it's going to be revolutionary for a time, but I don't know how he's going to do the training that he's doing and maintain his personality and his balance at age 21, 23, 26, like these other killers. I mean, Nadal, if you talk to people about Nadal and how he beat the Russian top player 2 years ago, what's the Russian top player's name? Medvedev. Was it 2 years ago at Wimbledon, or what was that?
Australian Open, 5 sets.
Yeah, Medvedev in the Australian Open. I mean, Medvedev's winning. He's younger by far. And Nadal is this killer. He's back to my contractor. He's like the bricklayer. He talks about the injuries he has in the interview. I'm not sure if it was right after the match or I think it might have been right after the match. He said I had to do whatever it took to chip, to do whatever to get the ball over the net one more time. And to me, he's like the contractor who says, hey, we got to build that dam before the flood and we're going to get it done. That's what Nadal has. And not many people have that. Muhammad Ali had that. He didn't train post 1968 like that for most of his fights, but he had that. He had that inner drive to win at all costs, but not to be a cheater and win at all costs, but definitely to do whatever he could do to win at all costs. And I don't know how many people have that. I don't know how Alcaraz could have that thing of beauty, that athlete in motion. I didn't see how then, and I don't want to jinx him. I hope he plays as long as he wants and wins as much as he wants. But I didn't see how he could pull off 15 or 20 years of that high level I saw 2 years ago.
Sifu, a lot of the experts are calling him a more complete player than already at age 20, a more complete player than Nadal, Djokovic, and Federer. You got some major tennis figures saying things like that.
Yeah.
And so now they're creating like this crazy expectations for him that he has to win everything. He has to win 25 Grand Slams. And it's an impossible image for him to have to live up to.
Yeah.
And now, he's a big target for every other player. For every other player, it's the biggest match of their career to play Carlos. And it might be, a little fraction of losing the joy of just going out there to, like, when Nadal came up and all through his first half of his career, he was always kind of the second guy in the shadows of Federer. He didn't have that incredible expectations to win everything and be the face of the sport. And it's going to be really hard for Carlos. Although I think he really did show incredible range, serving and volleying against Djokovic in that Wimbledon final and winning points easily. I mean, you never saw that happen. He was using that kick serve out wide to Djokovic and just coming in and making easy volleys. I can't remember seeing any other player do that to Djokovic.
Mm-hmm.
And the baseline, the movement. This guy, last summer at Wimbledon, Alcaraz really looked like he might be the greatest. He might be playing the greatest tennis we've ever seen played. Like, as some people say, like a blend of the best of Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. But he has not been able to sustain that since that Cincinnati match.
So when you watch, of course, the obvious match, the Alcaraz Djokovic match at Wimbledon a year ago, is that correct, or is that this year?
This summer.
This summer. If you watch that, you could make the argument that that is the most powerful, beautiful, graceful, in the zone match a high level tennis player has ever played against another high level tennis player who was still, Djokovic was 1 or 2 in the world, right, at that time of that match?
Yep. 1 and 2, I believe.
Yeah, you could argue that statement is accurate. You could argue that Ali, for a 6'3" individual, that some of his fights in the 1966 and 67, and Angelo Dundee says he was still developing. We don't know what we would have seen the end of 68, 69 through 70 if he kept going. So, but you could argue that those 67, 68 fights when Ali was trained and graceful and had meat on his bones, he was doing well when he didn't have meat on his bones. But by 67, 68, his fight weight's 212-ish pounds. And if he didn't train, he could have been a 220-pound, fully fleshed out, not flabby, but just allowing his flesh to grow. He's a big dude, at that age, at that time, at like age 25, 26, etc. So you could argue that he in that zone is the best boxer since we've had recorded film and video. Before I jump onto the gigantic boxers, the Irish guy and the other guys, Fury, and the other boxers now, tell me if what I said about Alcaraz makes any sense to you.
Muhammad Ali, I think he was the greatest of his time, but I think there's been several greater fighters since then. Alcaraz, yeah, it's intriguing to see where he's going to go from here. If maybe he could be one of these players who played his best tennis very early, and we don't know if he's going to ever be able to play and reach that level again.
Yeah. And what we're saying, of course, is not to jinx it or discount his future in any way. It's just to say the reality of the world is how many times do you get to be in the zone to such an extreme level? How many times? McEnroe from age 77 through 84 was growing in stature and in the zone. And in 84, he put together a year that has never been duplicated. He was unstoppable. I forget if he lost incredibly low number of sets, and he won almost every tournament. This is 84. And then his priorities changed. He wanted to be involved in different things, including family, children, art galleries, all the things that he went on to do, which are wonderful. So I still put him in my ranking as the GOAT, the GOAT. If you look at the history of tennis is doubles, singles, and mixed doubles. McEnroe won more tournaments for a male doing that. Navratilova surpassed him doing that. But as a male, if you look at the history of tennis and you use what I just said, singles, doubles, and mixed doubles, he won the most tournaments doing that, and had incredible skills, of course, in doubles that many people who were number one players didn't focus on and didn't have as an interest or as part of their natural ability as compared to McEnroe. McEnroe in a doubles tournament, he won a doubles tournament like an open tournament with 20 to 25-year-old pros. He won one of those. I think he's 63 now. I think he won that when he was 56. I mean, I don't think that's ever been done to win not a Grand Slam, but a normal regional or national tournament in America, a doubles tournament. I think he was 56, and if somebody knows, put the comments in the comment section. But I don't think that's ever been done before.
But he could not win a Grand Slam on clay.
Almost did.
Should have.
Yep.
2 sets to love up.
Yep. Do you know anything about the story behind that?
Just the regular myth that 2 sets to love, then the rain delay, and no, that's he calls it. He said he's still haunted by that loss sometimes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He grew up on clay in Queens. That was what they played on. It wasn't the Roland Garros powdery clay, as far as I know, but it was clay, and clay was common back in the 60s. And so he liked clay. He couldn't win on clay against the top 5-10 players most of the time. He's got some wins against them in different tournaments, but it would have been not common for him to do that. And so what the commentators have said about what he did at Roland Garros, and I think it was 1984, does that sound right to you?
Yep.
And I worked there. I was a ball boy there in 79 and 81. So I got to see a lot of these great athletes, and it was fascinating. It was I would say is the best job I ever had. And I didn't get paid in money. I got paid in les bons d'achat. Those are called coupons. Les bons d'achat. And I was able to go out to the sporting goods store and get Adidas and Sergio Tacchini warm-ups, headbands, sneakers, tennis rackets, whatever I want. And I think it would have been like 1981, what I got allowed me to buy 4 sweatsuits, some socks, and a tennis racket. So what's that equates to? Maybe $1,500 today, something like that.
Those were like gold when you were a kid.
They were gold. I loved them. I kept those sweatsuits for 20 years. And my dad still has one of them, an Adidas one, a blue Adidas one. But so there's my little bit on Roland Garros. But McEnroe,
even better is all the memories you must have from having the best seat in the house for the best players in the world. What are some standout memories?
Well, the one standout memory is McEnroe, and when I saw him in the I got the ball boy for him in the first few rounds. And I said, there's been nothing. I mean, I worked in 79 for the Davis Cup, French versus Czechoslovakia. So it was Yannick Noah versus Lendl. They were both 17 to 18 years of age. And then other great players behind them. And then that was Davis Cup probably in June of 1979. And then June or that might have been July. So here we are in May and June of 1981 at the French Open. McEnroe shows up. He's recovering from an ankle injury. So he's got an air cast on during practice, those ones where you plastic and then you inflate them and they press in. And then he had this ability to know where the other person was going to hit it. So in clay, you get more time between shots historically, especially the wooden racket era. But McEnroe seemed to have to run less over 3 sets or 5 sets than the other players. So I thought that was incredible, this premonition he seemed to have. And then the shot making ability and then the focus he had. I said, this guy is incredible. And I told the host family I had, he was a great tennis player, and he was a guy in his probably early 50s at the time, who knew tennis history a lot more than I did when I was 18. I said, McEnroe is the best player out there. He said, mais non, il ne peut pas gagner sur la terre battue. He can't win on clay. He was right. But I said, nobody hits the ball like this guy. Nobody has the premonition that this guy has, or the net ability that this guy has. He's fascinating to watch. Some of these guys I thought were repetitive to watch. Board because he wins becomes less of a repetitive player, but a lot of his stuff was somewhat repetitive. McEnroe, there's very little that's boring in what he does. Over to you, Scoop.
You implying that Board was boring? Board and
In
Chris
a way,
Evert were boring?
compared to McEnroe, I would say anybody's boring.
McEnroe, yeah, he made it look easy. He never had to wear wristbands. Or he would never wristbands. He would wipe the sweat off his forehead with his shoulder. But, yeah, he did make the game look easy, natural mover. Yep, still was the big ticket seller for the senior tour just a few years ago. I remember I covered that one in Tampa. Went to it, and it was McEnroe, Blake, Courier, and I think Roddick. And we get to the private club, and they have the sign with the board and John McEnroe tennis. They didn't even mention any of the other names. It was John McEnroe was the main attraction, and he was I think he was 60 years old at the time, and that was the last time he played a senior tour match.
Yeah, he's had some meniscus tears. Not sure which knee. They might be all in one knee, or they might be both knees. He mentioned that recently. So he's 63-year-old hombre, about to be 64 probably. And one of the things I was going to say about that match with Lendl is that they say that McEnroe, I think he won Wimbledon in '84. Can't remember. They said he turned Roland Garros into Wimbledon for 2 sets, which they'd never seen before. I don't know if that's ever been done in a final of a Grand Slam, where you use one technique on one court and you go to a court that's completely different, use the same technique, and it works. So like instead of in the French Open, you historically, like Wilander, you might have to angle one shot over the guy's forehand, then angle the next volley over to his backhand. The volley winning might take you 2 or 3 strokes sometimes. But McEnroe versus Lendl for 2 sets, McEnroe was polishing off volleys, oftentimes in one shot, just like he was playing at Wimbledon. Imagine that.
The book on McEnroe, Facing McEnroe, and that was a lot of fun to do that one. A lot of colorful stories. One of the memories that comes to mind about McEnroe is he told me that he met Mike Tyson back in the 80s when Tyson was the champ and he was still a top player. He said Tyson was like tapping his chest, like kind of like, where's your muscles, man? He goes, I'm a tennis player. I don't need muscles in my upper body. You need the muscles in my legs. So that's a unique John McEnroe, Mike Tyson encounter.
That's interesting that he told that to Tyson back in the 80s. And then in the 90s, the comeback of Agassi, a lot of it was about his personal training, where he got his bench press up. I think he was doing 210 or 220. He's a strongly built guy. And he's sort of stiff in stature. So that sometimes helps with the bench press and squats and those types of things. But he went at it. He went at that training, and he went at that focus, and he had to play in Agassi had to play in all of these qualifying tournaments around the United States in order to qualify to get into the higher level ATP events. And he did that. I mean, he was he was in events where he's playing with number 300 or number 500 in the world, and they're gunning for him life or death, and he has to, win 4 or 5 matches to win those tournaments and get himself back in the I forget what his ranking dropped to at that point, but it was not a ranking high enough to get him into the Grand Slams.
190 or something.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody told me a story. I played at a club in Sarasota, Florida, where Agassi had played one of his early tournaments and early pro tournaments, and he lost, and he made himself walk back to the Bollettieri Academy, which was about 15 miles. So he was a great perfectionist, even though he claims he didn't love tennis. I think that might be fictional, because nobody continues to play tennis so long until their body breaks down, which he did until his mid-30s. He must have loved tennis a lot.
Well, if you've did you write Facing Agassi or anything about Agassi?
No, not yet. Yeah, someday.
Have you watched or read I'm not sure how many books he's written, but I read his book that must have come out sometime around 2008 to 2014, somewhere in there. And that, plus any interviews and any other anecdotes about him with his father, putting all that pressure on him to be the best, which McEnroe had a fair amount of that as well from both parents, but it wasn't this life or death thing. It was just a question at the dinner table. McEnroe talks about he comes home and he got an A. His mom would say, "Why didn't you get an A plus? I was second at this event. Why weren't you first?" He got that in just a question way, where I think Agassi got more of the harshness from his father, surviving. His father, I'm sure, was born in Iran, and Agassi has to deal with the harshness of that during his youth more than many people have had to do.
He also had to drive himself. I knew a guy, Reno Manet, who was a hitting partner and a coach in Florida, and good enough to train with Sampras and Agassi, even though he never had an ATP point. And he told me one time when Agassi was like 2 or 3 in the world, he was playing with Agassi. They played sets, and this guy, Reno Manet, his name is Reno Manet, said that he beat Agassi in that practice set when Agassi was 2 in the world and he was 0 ranking, never had a ranking. That's how good this guy was. And he said Agassi got so upset by that, he smashed all his rackets. And he said he went to the Mitsubishi car, which where all the cars were at the academy that they used. He said he got into the car and he was like driving around the parking lot, simultaneously banging the horn, like stepping on the gas and then the brakes, and like yelling at the same time. That's how upset Agassi got losing a practice set.
Wow.
So he also had a tremendous self-drive too.
So Tyson Fury, who's the boxer of the last 15 years we've heard so much about, who's 6'6", is that
6'9".
6'9", okay, 6'9", 260.
Ranges, he carries a lot of extra weight. Yeah, I guess 260, 270.
6'9", and he has, since a young age, being that gypsy training, they learned how to move, and he learned how to move at a young age. Then he grew into this humongous person. So he has movement that's uncommon with large boxers. The ability to dodge, ability to make changes in motion, all that. He's got a lot of that. So if you took Ali, who learned about boxers a lot of times during the fight and was able to change his strategy, you take Ali at age 25, 26 in his prime at 212 pounds fighting weight, you put him against a 6'9" guy who's got similar skill set, probably not as quick. I don't think anybody in the heavyweights, in the top 5 heavyweights, ever had quicker punches from start to finish than Ali, and I'd like to hear different. If that's not accurate, I'd like to hear the sports science and the videography that's been done to account for that. But what would happen in your opinion in a, I don't like 15 round fights. I don't even like 12, but let's say it's a 12 round fight. You took Tyson Fury at his best, at his huge size, against Ali when he's 25 or 26 over a 12 round fight.
Ali would have no chance.
No chance.
Tyson Fury, the best of Tyson Fury was only one fight though. It was against Vladimir Klitschko, and Vladimir Klitschko at the time was champion for about 10 years, totally dominant. And Tyson Fury psyched him out before the fight with his confidence, with his talking, with his putting him down. He psyched him out. And then he did it in the ring. Klitschko didn't know what to do, and he boxed a masterpiece. And Klitschko is 6'5", 6'6" himself. So Ali, there's no way Ali would have been able to deal with those long arms and that jab, and it's just too big, too much of a disadvantage.
And Ali couldn't have held him like Ali would do to George Foreman and other people.
Couldn't get inside. It would have looked like a giant against a small guy, and Fury's skills and his jab and his moves are just too good. He doesn't get caught. He got caught by the one punch against Steve Cunningham earlier in his career where he lost his focus and concentration and got caught with a punch and got knocked down by a cruiserweight. And then he got up, but he wasn't really hurt. He has a really good ability to take the punch. Yeah, I just can't see any of those smaller guys, even like Mike Tyson at his best. I don't see how they can deal with Tyson. I think Tyson Fury at his best could beat anybody from boxing history, but he was only at his best in that one fight. He doesn't have the dedication to and the discipline to stay in shape between fights like the Klitschko's always did. Like Tyson, Tyson never got fat when he was at his best. Fury looked terrible in his last fight. He's looked terrible for years, actually. The way he lets his physique go and what he's eating and drinking. But if Tyson Fury had the discipline of a guy like Tyson or Klitschko or Bernard Hopkins,
Holyfield,
Marvin Hagler, Holyfield, he would have been the greatest dominant heavyweight fighter of all time. But no.
He got rocked by Deontay Wilder where he was down and then he recovered from that. That looked like it could have gone the other way if his brain didn't respond to that concussion.
He looked shot already then. He's been through drugs and drinking, addiction. I thought he looked physically bad in those fights too. But his talent is so good that he can just get through a guy like Wilder with just the talent. He has not looked impressive since the Klitschko fight, which is about 7-8 years ago.
I'm going to look at his 6'9". Let's just wait here. Born in Manchester, the Gypsy King, son of Irish traveler parents. Travelers means gypsies. Amber and John Fury. Born prematurely. That's interesting.
Fury's confidence is questionable because he's been dodging fights with Usyk now 2 times, and he's avoided Anthony Joshua. These are both $100 million fights, and he talks them down as if one guy's a middleweight sausage and the other guy is a bodybuilder. And he talks that he'll beat them easily, but then he gets out of the fights. He makes these terms and cancels the fight to fight these other guys for much smaller money, much less threat, much less excitement. So I think he knows he feels vulnerable and he only wants to fight guys that he knows he can beat. But now he's kind of cornered now. He ducked Usyk fight 2 times, and they were supposed to fight in December, and he canceled that. And now it's going to be supposedly in February if Fury goes on with it. But I don't see how Fury can get out of the fight this time.
So he has his last non-win was draw with Deontay Wilder in 2018. All wins since then. He's fought Deontay Wilder, Trice Nagano, you mentioned, Derek Chisora, and Otto Whalen, and he's won all those
Otto
fights. But
Wallin, Dillian
Wallin,
White, he hasn't looked really good in any of the fights.
got it. So is he hanging on just to make a buck here and there, but he wants to live his life the way on his terms?
Yeah, I think he's like a professional wrestler now. He just wants to keep the title, keep the easy money coming in, and not fight those two guys, Usyk and Joshua, who could end his reputation, his leverage, his value, everything.
Okay, how about Lennox Lewis at his best, Tyson Fury at his best?
Yeah, that's Lennox Lewis. I think Lennox Lewis is the greatest of all time at it, but having to deal with that Tyson Fury skills and the height and the long reach and the intelligence. Lennox Lewis had a lot of trouble with Vitaly Klitschko, who was bigger than him. One of the few guys.
I thought he won that fight, the Klitschko fight. I thought Klitschko won.
He was winning it, but then until it was stopped because of the cuts, and then Lennox
yeah,
Lewis
the cuts. Yeah,
declined,
that's right.
Lennox Lewis declined the rematch for at least 25 million.
Yeah.
And never fought again.
So he was being dominated by Klitschko, correct, until the cuts?
No. It was,
No.
But he was getting rocked, and he was behind in the scorecards. He
Okay.
wasn't getting dominated.
Okay.
But it was the hardest fight of his career. And I believe he summoned the last surge of greatness in him to get back into that fight and to cut Klitschko up and to actually took the momentum in the fight after the 6th round, but then the referee stopped the fight because of the very bad cuts on Klitschko's face. But Lennox Lewis did not want that rematch.
Yep. He had a long career. I think he kept clean, as far as I know. I don't know any negative stories about his lifestyle.
Yep. But he was 30. I think he was 38 at the time, but he was still in great shape. And before that Klitschko fight, there was no talk at all of him retiring or it being his last fight. He was talking about having other fights in the future and keep going. But everything changed after that Klitschko fight.
Yeah. And you said the Klitschko brothers trained year round.
Oh, both Klitschko's, they were always in shape. They were always in the gym. Vladimir still is. Vladimir still looks like he could fight.
One has a law degree and one has a medical degree. I forget what their degrees are.
Yeah, both doctors. Yeah.
Both doctors. Okay. So round one, we should probably wind down now. And it's been a great conversation, Scoop. I appreciate it, and shared a lot of good stories. And maybe we could hit on some of these other points and flesh them out a little bit in a future conversation. So I'll send you the link to what we did today and see what your thoughts are, and we'll connect again.
I would love to, Sifu. Thank you. Anytime.
You want to share your website again, Scoop?
My tennis website is tennis-pros.com, tennis-prose.com. My boxing site is ringobserver.com. I just did a Jerry Cooney biofile. That's a lot of fun read. I'll put that up next week. And I have also a website where I post various biofile interviews that I've been doing since 1992, as I mentioned earlier. That's just a range of anybody from sports to astronauts to movie stars, singers, police officer, artists, any subject. And that's mrbiofile.com, MRBIOFILE.com.
Fantastic. Been great connecting with you, Scoop. It's 212 or 312 in 212 in New Jersey right now, correct?
Yep.
So time to do whatever you got to do and enjoy the New Jersey evening, the afternoon and evening. I'm Sifu Slim at sifuslim.com, author of The Aging Athlete, Sedentary Nation is another book, and the soon to be released Raising a Child Athlete, ? Things you need to know. And please give us a thumbs up, and have any questions or comments, list them down below and we'll try to get back to you. Until next time, Aloha.